at the beginning of this year, we, and I guess probably at the end of last year too, we started discussing the importance of doing a land acknowledgement, coming at it from the acknowledging that we're, those of us in the chapter are settlers to this land, and in one shape or form over the last couple centuries, and that learning about the original inhabitants, the original stewards of the lands, the agricultural lands, the diverse ecosystems in the state that we now call New Mexico, would be an important part of our meetings to kind of help us refocus and keep that in our minds, lead education, and hopefully lead action. And those of us privileged to have the time and financial resources to redistribute wealth and to acknowledge that most of us are working and making a living on land that belonged to people that were never compensated for it, and that were illegally displaced. So I'd like to read a short acknowledgement. So here in Albuquerque, I am on the unceded and illegally occupied traditional homelands of the Tiwa people. The Tiwa are a Pueblo people. The Pueblo people's homelands stretched across the so-called New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona. There are 19 Pueblo tribes, plus 4 other indigenous people that reside in so-called New Mexico. I would like to honor the land stewardship by the people of, by these people, both past and present. Much of the knowledge that we put into our agricultural practice today is unattributed indigenous wisdom. The seeds that we grow were cultivated and bred for many generations, and much work has been done so that we could have the successes and do the work that we do today. And we have a duty as occupants and people on this land to steward, love, and share it with all human and non-human inhabitants, so that future generations may do so as well. I should have included this in the introductions, but I would like to invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on that and everything that's going on in this country, and the climate change that we're facing, and the impacts that have happened on that land. If you know the land that which you reside on, whose traditional homelands and current land it is, it'd be lovely to post that in the chat so we can see where everyone's coming from. And if you don't, ask a colleague or friend or elder that is in your area that may know. Part of the reason that we're doing these Joy of Soil and thinking about regenerative agriculture is because we love this land, and we acknowledge that we've treated it poorly and we've not been the best stewards for it, and so that we need to learn from our elders and others and come together and figure out how to return to a better relationship with it. Well, thanks, Don. It sounds beautiful and it looks beautiful where you're at. I think we're gonna go ahead and hand it off to you. The floor is yours. If anyone, I suppose we'll just shout out if the connection gets poor, and we can try to guide you back, or you can retrace your steps or something. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, and we'll let you just give us an introduction to your land, what you've been doing on it, what you do today with it, your relationship with the land, and we'll finish with Q&A. I don't know, a little after 7 or something. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was a beautiful introduction, and really, I really appreciate the acknowledgement of the native peoples that this land, that they were owned and took care of this land for a long time before Western Europeans ever settled in these areas. So thank you for that acknowledgement. A little bit about the history of our farm and everything. As I speak, I'll be walking down a little bit, and I just kind of wanted to walk the field a little bit with you to kind of show you how we at Santa Cruz Farm feel that's really important to try to get most of the fields covered in some kind of a cover crop or in some kind of a covering, so that the soil doesn't lay bare, and so that it retains moisture in the soil. So that was the purpose of kind of walking and looking at the farm. And then it's a really strange day here today. It's kind of overcast. I don't know if that's smoke or if that's clouds, but the sun is kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of covered over. It's glowing or something. It's kind of a weird afternoon. But the name of our farm is called the Santa Cruz Farm, and I named it after our church, the Santa Cruz Church, and after the Santa Cruz de la Cañada land grant. And that land grant was a grant for 16 families that settled here on this side of the river between Okeowinge, Santa Clara, and Pojoaque. It's interesting that it nestled itself in between all these pueblos, and then used the water that is available to the community itself. I live on just a little bit of history. You know, our family's been farming this same land for over 400 years, and just until recently, it was done with very little technology, and I mean very little technology. Until I think it was 1964, here on the land that we're standing on right now, there was no electricity until 1964. And my great grandparents farmed using wooden plows and wooden shovels, and had a couple of old mules or an old mule. And then when I was growing up with Grandpa, I remember Grandpa following a mule, and he'd do all this planting and cultivating with a mule. So, you know, I tell people, you know, it's people can farm small acreages of land for multiple generations if they're willing to put some effort into it and take care of the land and listen to the what I like to talk about is listen to the spirituality of the land, and listen to what the land has to offer, not only in edibles, but also in that spiritual contentment of knowing that we're on the right path of sustainability, of family, of community. It's really fulfilling to say that if we don't do too much damage, we can continue farming for the next 400, 700 years, using pretty much the same techniques of cover cropping, of crop rotation, managing the limited resources of water. So that's a little bit of our history. Of a little bit of the production that we try to do here is, as you can see, as we were walking through, I wasn't explaining about the crops a lot, but I'll speak a little bit about them. As we were walking through the top, we had our fall and winter production cold frames up, and the structures are ready planted. And we walked through a patch of old strawberry plants that we were pulling up, and then we had some cover crops planted, and now we're looking at a patch of about 500 blackberry plants that we just stopped harvesting this week. This is the last week that they started producing. Part of what you can see is the undergrowth underneath those blackberries, and that's all the desert clover. So we try to plant our perennials with a little bit of a cover cropping in between, and we mostly mow it in the spring, and then in the middle of the summer or towards the fall, we'll let that cover crop grow over so that it kind of reseeds itself if possible, and then we'll just try to manage the following year. But we try to have cover crops in all our annual fields at least a year previous to planting an annual crop, and 2 years if possible to let one field go fallow. And I have a good example of a field being out of production for about 4 years. And we had a heavy perennial field on it, and we transitioned out of the perennial to a fallow and then to cover crop. And it's right now it's on its 4th year. This coming year, we'll probably plant a biannual there. Our strawberries will be planted in that big field, and you can see it directly through here, I think. And I'll walk in that direction in a little bit, but it's got a lot of good organic matter, and it's really growing well. We've tried to manage the weeds in that section of the field so that the weeds don't go to seed, but sometimes it's easier said than done. We're coming into another patch right here where it's also a perennial cover crop, and a perennial plant. We have our asparagus that we have planted in here, and you can see a beautiful fern now that's right in front of you, and this whole field is filled up with asparagus ferns. And usually what we do is we keep them mowed, and we'll harvest the asparagus all the way to its end of its harvesting in April, May. And then we'll manage the weeds a little bit, and then we let the cover crop grow over the clover. And you can see that the clover itself is about 4 feet tall. And I'll shake it a little bit so you can see, excuse me, you can see how beautiful it looks. The other beautiful thing about having a field like this, you can see a little bit of red clover growing over there, also about 5 feet to the right, is that so cover crops don't only really help the soil, which we know they do. This cover crop adds tons of organic matter per acre, and I'm not quite sure on the nitrogen itself how much it puts into the soil, but it really is beneficial. But the other beneficial I really wanted to mention a little bit was for the pollinators. You should see the amount of bees that the farm has. And I believe it's directly linked to the amount of cover crops that we have. And it really feeds the bees and helps produce a huge amount of honey. So this is kind of like one of our summer to fall cover crops. Another crop that I like to use when I'm getting ready for a spring planting and a fall crop planting. And I don't have an example of it here. I have another field, and it's a winter rye with a hairy vetch and an Austrian pea mix. And the rye grows well now, and we get a little bit of pea growth, but really the benefit really comes in the spring when the peas and the rye are tall and that hairy vetch starts to grow really, really well. That's one of my favorite fall crops. And out of that, I think we get enough nitrogen for a good crop of chili or corn. I think the numbers say if it's grown right and watered correctly, which this year we might not get the amount of water that we need just because our stream is really dry, and the reservoir that we irrigate from has closed down for the season. So we probably won't get to water any more cover crops this fall. And we're hoping that we'll get a good winter so that it gets moist and stays moist enough to endure the coming year. But there's no guarantees on that. So I'll usually plant my winter cover crop in late August or September to ensure that I get a good cover going into the fall and into the winter. It has some growth, 6 to 8 inches maybe, before it gets too cold and it freezes up. In some of my spring cover crops that I really like to plant is a buckwheat. And I really like the buckwheat cover crop quite a bit because of all the pollinator it attracts. And then the conditioning of the soil itself is a really, really good conditioning of the soil once you get to turn that buckwheat in. One of the disadvantages of that is that if you don't turn it in time, then it reseeds itself pretty quickly. And then you have a hard time the coming year with the reseeding of the buckwheat itself. I tell people too, as an aside, I tell people too that each person or each individual piece of land has its own requirements for its cover crops, so that not every formula works exactly the same. I think that after years of working your land and understanding it, you'll start to come up with your own formulas of what's the best cover crop for your fields. And at what time you want to use it, and how do you want to use your crop. There's another crop that I kind of like to use quite often when I'm working into new fields or fields that have some weeds in it, is I like to use a really heavy sunflower cover crop. And the cover crop for sunflowers, it's not so much that it adds a lot of nutrients to the field, but it really helps break up the soil. So you get those deep, deep roots going into the soil that break up a hard pan or go deep, and then then you have tons and tons of organic matter when you incorporate the sunflowers back into the soil. It can be a little difficult at times, just because they're such a big sunflowers, and to mow it down. So you have to have almost a good weed whacker to mow it down, or else if you have a mower on the tractor, then it kind of runs over it and it just mows over the top. It doesn't really whack them down. That's the only drawback I've seen, and everything I'm talking about is really small scale. So we don't invest a lot into a lot of huge equipment. So we try to manage small pieces of land and cover cropping as we go. Our largest section right now is probably 75 feet wide by 120 feet long. And that's directly in front of you with a corn behind it back there. You can tell how tall that cover crop is, because that corn is at least, close to 6 foot tall when we're getting ready to harvest it.
Hey,
So yeah.
would you mind trying to turn your video on and off again? Oh, now we got you. It was frozen for a second, but now we see. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm thinking of walking back up a little bit closer to where there might be a better conductivity. I'm not sure how good it is down here, or if it matters at all.
We can hear you good, and now we can see the field nice.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so I'm really proud of this cover right here. It's done really, really good this year. As you can see, there's not a lot of weeds. There's a few weeds right in here. but not very many weeds throughout the field itself. Yeah, I've been cover cropping for, so this is my main source of nutrients is the different cover crops and the crops that we use. I do add a little bit of mulch and compost that I make on the farm, but it's mostly for organic matter right on the beds themselves, just to increase that organic matter on top of the beds, whether it's a greens or a small root crop. But 90% of our farm is all cover cropping and rotating small pieces.
Don, could you talk about how you transition from a cover crop field into a vegetable or a cash crop, and where you get your cover crop seed?
So a lot of okay, yeah, I think that so like this field that you're looking at right here, it'll start to break down now as soon as it freezes in October. By mid-October, November, all of that cover cropping should be dried out. So I'll bring in the mower with a tractor and I'll mow down any dry stalks. I'll let them sit on top. And I don't really like to incorporate anything this early in the season. I'll wait later on in January or February when I'm starting to get that field ready, and I'll incorporate any kind of excess material that was laying on top of the soil. And that way it protects the soil even more throughout the winter and if there's any dry months. And then if it does snow, then that moisture is even held longer in that soil itself. It gives it a chance for that soil to really be resilient throughout the winter. And then in the spring, when we decide what crops we're going to follow through with, it'll be like a crop with hairy vetch in it, has a lot of nitrogen. I'll go ahead and incorporate that in the spring. It'll still grow quite a bit in the spring. I try to mow it down just before it starts to flower. And then by about April 15th, April 27th, I'll go out there and I'll mow anything that's still standing and I'll start to incorporate it into the soil. Depending on how big it is, it might take me a couple of passes with a 5-foot rotor tiller behind the tractor. Once I get it incorporated into the soil, then I'll let it break down about anywhere, maybe 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Do a light rotor tilling, and then I can start to prepare my seed beds. I really don't worry about a lot of trash on the top, but I do like to get those seed beds as much organic matter and as much nutrients that I can put into the soil from the previous cover crop. So a cover crop like vetch, I'll follow it up with a big nitrogen eater like green chili or sweet corn. And then I'll follow up the next year with a different crop that doesn't take up as much nitrogen. So I'll do some roots, or I'll go ahead and do some light feeders, maybe some lettuce, where I don't have to incorporate a lot of nutrients into it. Everything we do here is with small equipment or walk behind tractors. I have a small BCS tractor. I have a couple of weed whackers. So that's why I try not to get too overzealous with large pieces of land, because it takes us a bit of time to incorporate it itself. And then with the sunflowers and stuff, I run over them with a tractor and then I mow them down a little bit and have to come back and do it a couple of times. And I think that's what I mean when people are working on their own fields. They kind of have to figure out their methods and kind of use what there is around there to be able to satisfy the needs of the fields and the crop itself. The cover crop seeds I've gotten, Mostly I've gotten them from, like I say, I planted a clover. The desert clover has been here for years. The red clover comes back every year. The hairy vetch, the Austrian peas, and the triticale, I've been getting them out of Peaceful Valley just because they're certified organic. They're a little expensive. That's one thing about trying to use cover crops that are more I'm not sure what the word is, but more adapted to your area, where you don't have to buy as many cover crops, but you can just encourage the ones that are growing. It can be pretty expensive for cover crop seed. I I think that answered those questions.
Don, how long have you been farming at Santa Cruz Farm?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I thought I might have covered that. I've been farming here, here on the farm itself. All my life, I grew up right here. I grew up right here, which is already getting close to 63 years. I started going to farmers markets in the early 1980s. And I think I got certified in 1985, certified organic, or 1986. So I certified first through the New Mexico Commodity Commission. I think it was the New Mexico Commodity Commission or the New Mexico Organic Commodity Commission, something like that. And then it transitioned over when USDA got involved in the organic business, and they started to create the USDA rules, and then it went from the Commodity Commission, I think, to NMDA, which we're certified under right now. So it's been close. I've been farming. Well, I've been helping Dad and Grandpa since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and then trying to make a living off of it, which I think has been, I tell people it's a lifestyle choice. I mean, we've been lucky enough and blessed by the Creator and everybody that we've made enough money to pay the bills. We're getting rich, but we're content, and we're really pleased what has been provided for us, and what we can do with it. And I believe that we'll continue to do that. My nephew Nettie, which a lot of you guys know, is really working on the farm a lot. He's managing the Santa Fe Farmers Market now, but he comes to help quite a bit when he can. And then he continues to really emphasize that he really wants to continue farming, that he really enjoys farming, and wants to see it in his future. So I see that this type of small agricultural production, and I like to call it, I like to say it's keeping it appropriate and applicable to the sites that are growing in, and that's one of the most important kind of aspects that there is, and not get caught up in a lot of the whoopla that goes on. We've been we grow and this is the soundbite I like to tell people, and I'm sure a lot of you folks have already heard me say it numerous times, is we grow 72 different varieties of produce 12 months a year using nothing but solar energy. So we think that as the key to sustainability and the small agricultural atmosphere realm, keeping it real, and people can make enough money to pay the bills and live a good lifestyle. It's not especially now, with this pandemic that's occurred, and I think it's really about time young farmers and farmers from across the U.S. and the globe really get acknowledged for all the work that they're doing. And I'm really glad to see that the Farmers Coalition and different entities are really stepped up to to support the needs of people that don't have the food or the accessibility to get food. So, you know, this shows how important it is for small farms to really be viable in their communities, because that's what's going to feed their local communities. It's not going to be, I don't believe it's going to be the big industrial farms that are going to meet the needs for small rural communities. I think it's small farmers, young farmers, people that are going to step up and take on the responsibility.
Don, we have a question from Raina. Her question is, does the strawberries get incorporated into the soil as well?
No, so that's a good question. So we're getting ready. Thank you for the question. No, we don't incorporate any of those kinds of like the strawberries, the tomatoes, or any infected plants that might be on the farm itself. We don't incorporate them into the soil, and we don't put them into the compost. We just don't want to introduce any new kind of diseases or any kind of viruses or anything into the soil. So like we plant our strawberries every 3 years. We plant a brand new 5,000 cropping, and it lasts for 2 years, but we've been able to get pretty good production out of the 3rd year. We keep them and we rotate every 3 years. Purchase certified disease-free stock, root stock, so that we know that we introduce anything into our soil, that it's a really good clean root stock that we're putting into it, and then we'll grow it out for 1 full year. Then we put it on the list for the organic certification, and then we can get it certified after it's been in the ground 1 full year. So we're real careful that we don't want to introduce any kind of diseases into our soil. And that goes along with our chili fields too. I know a lot of people get phytophthora or the chili wilt or different kinds of diseases in their chili. And I think that's where you have to really learn the texture of your soils and really understand the importance of cover cropping, so that you do get a good chili crop and you don't get any kind of diseases. I think that's that goes into the whole thing about, and I don't want to get into any specifics, but how you manage your cover crops. I really want to talk to the importance of cover cropping and understanding your own system, so that you avoid those kinds of pitfalls in the future. So like here, you'll see some chili growing in here. We won't plant chili in this field for another 4 or 5 years. And before that, we'll follow up with a full year of nothing but fallow and cover crop to make sure the soil is nice and healthy. And then we'll plant a chili crop in here again in about 5 years. And then we'll make sure that we manage the water so that we don't get any of that phytophthora or any of that chili wilt. I can't remember the name of that other chili wilt. But no, I think managing what you introduce into the soil, that was a great question, is make sure you know what you introduce, whether it's plant stock or seeds, so that it doesn't become a problem. I know one time I let a friend of mine bring in a tray of seedlings to grow in my greenhouse, and he introduced a little bit of bindweed, and I still have a hard time pulling up the bindweed from that one greenhouse itself. So even just a small little root or any kind of a misstep can really be harmful.
Don, we have another question from Atlas, who asks, how do you fertilize your land for biodynamic growing? And then a question from Annette about incorporating animals.
So on that biodynamic question, I'll more to biodynamic experts learning about that process now. I'm really interested in the biodynamic soil amendments, and we're hoping to have a class and a workshop in the spring of it this year with Jen, but it never quite happened because of the coronavirus. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that, and if we do pull off some kind of a workshop, I'll be sure to invite all of you to participate. We follow mostly the biodynamic calendar is what I've really been aligning myself to the last few years, and I really enjoy the way it works. It really lines up with the days that we've traditionally planted, like Dia de San Juan and Dia de San Isidro, and within a few days or not very far off, the biodynamic calendars line up with that. So I feel real confident planting in those days and then following up with a lot of their directions. What was the other part of the question? I forgot.
The other question was, do you incorporate animals on your operation?
So we don't really fertilize. We don't fertilize with animal manures. I'll say that straightforward. Just because it's a small little farm and we don't have enough animal manures or anything to make an impact. But I do raise sheep. I have 3 sheep that we walked by a little bit earlier. Turkeys, I've raised hogs, and I think that's part of the living organism of the farm itself, is to have not only the vegetable piece, but to have all these other kinds of farm animals around, because it adds to the livelihood, or to that kind of I hate to get too corny, but it kind of towards that kind of like that a system, kind of a holistic systems approach. That might be a little bit out there, but with the animals moving and the water moving, the plants growing, everything works together in harmony. I've let the turkeys, I don't let them roam now through the fields, but at some point I'll let the turkeys out and I'll let them go through and pick through the fields. Not so much for fertilizing, but just for the activity that they do and the way they scratch the soil and everything. Back when I was a younger kid, and I'd like to do it a little bit more if I can kind of think about this, and I'm kind of leaning towards it, is my dad used to let the hog, we used to raise hogs and pigs, and every fall he'd let the pigs come out here, and what he would say is josear. It would come out and eat anything left, and with their snouts they'd plow the fields and they'd get all the grubs, and they'd eat a lot of that bindweed. They love eating marigolds, and a lot of those perennial weeds would be gone. So it'd be nice to incorporate a little bit more of that type of activity into the farm. Sometimes, I grew up with that kind of activity and nobody got sick, but now with USDA and all these health rules, there's certain regulations that don't allow us to graze our animals in the fields or before a certain amount of time. So on a small scale like we're doing, it's a little bit more challenging, but I'm hoping that we could figure it out a little bit more. But most of our nutrients are coming from the cover crops. I mean, we're not having a lot of problems yet. And but then again, we're really trying to manage how much we're growing and how we're growing it.
Don, we have another question from Demetrius, and he's asking more about why you're not composting those strawberries or tomatoes.
No, because we're not composting. That's a great question. Thank you. It's because we do everything here on the farm. We don't have thermometers for our compost piles, and I'm not sure our compost piles are getting hot enough to kill any kind of bacteria or virus within the roots themselves. So instead of taking that chance, like the tomatoes or the strawberries or even eggplant, I don't think that we turn the eggplant back in either. We'll just take them out and we'll just let them rot on their own outside and dry up, and that's it. We don't incorporate them back in, just because we don't want to take a chance of any kind of diseases getting back into the fields. And that's the same thing for the chili. Like, we won't plant chili in this field again for at least 5 years. Because once you get some kind of a virus or some kind of a bacteria, it's really hard to get rid of them in the soil without some kind of a I don't know if you would be able to use some kind of a chemical kill on them or something. But then you're killing everything in the soil, and I don't think that's what you want to do. I think what you want to do is try to leave as much life in the soil as possible. So this cover crop right here, it's mostly marigolds. And what it does, I'm able to mow it down, as you can see. I think you can see it a little bit. And I'll feed it to the sheep. So I'm able to grow this for feed for the sheep. And then being able just to use it to cover the soil itself so that it's not bare. And I'll leave it like this all winter long. In the spring, I'll come in and I'll clean it up a little bit. I'll incorporate that right back into the beds. I'll add a little bit of compost, and then we're ready to go.
Hey Don, this is Carlos. I have a question for you. I was wondering how big is your total farm, and like how much percentage of it each season is in like cash crops, and how much is in cover crop?
So our farm is about 4.5 acres. And I can't remember if I read a book a while back by Joe Stolen or who I read it by, but I think it's a third, and a third. So a third in perennials, a third in annual, and a third in cover crops or biannuals. And I try to keep the perennials out of that 3-year rotation. So it's mostly a third, and a third of cover crop, annuals, and then a perennial. And so that I'm always in one different third every different year with a different cover crop.
Okay, Don, one question from Ian. His question is just, do sheep like marigolds?
You know, I haven't, she loves them. She loves anything green like that. They really enjoy them. They really, really enjoy them.
And then the next question is from Atlas, and he's asking, does growing red clover and desert clover with the asparagus help fertilize the asparagus so that you don't need to fertilize it or grow it elsewhere?
That's exactly what it does, and that's what that clover does. Is every year we mow it down, and it just adds nitrogen right back into the soil. And kind of, I might have fallen behind a little bit on mowing it down this year because it looks like it went to flower. I kind of like to mow it down just before it glows to flower. But this year it doesn't look like I was quite on time to do that. But no, that's why it's designed, is to leave it in between the asparagus and just mow it down, and then come back in and not have to add anything else to the asparagus. We'll go ahead and put some compost just to add or more organic matter, but in the nutrients, just to cover crop. And I really want to. I might have the red clover that we use and the white clover. I would rethink some of those decisions I had made several years ago. Just because when I put that clover inside my blackberries, I had a really hard time managing it between the blackberries themselves. And for some reason, I thought that I was going to be able to maintain the clovers in the pathways, but that didn't happen. And so I don't think I'd plant red clover again. In a matter of fact, I won't, just because if it goes to seed, it gets pretty difficult to manage. And the desert clover, it's an annual. It seeds itself every year, and that's why when you want to manage it, just make sure you mow it before it goes to seed. And it'll take you a couple of years to get it under control, but it's more manageable than the cover crop that spreads by rhizomes instead of by seed.
Okay, Don, it's a few minutes after 7, and we have a couple more questions. Atlas is asking, do you compost or burn the asparagus in the fall after it has died?
We burn them. We burn them. We burn them, and we try to burn them in small piles in the field. Just because if there's any asparagus larvae or the asparagus beetle, which puts its larvae in the stalk, and then if you break that stalk up and that larvae spreads into the soil, then it has a chance of repopulating your asparagus patch the following year. So we'll take it down, put it in small piles, and burn it right there in the field itself, so we're not trying to spread any of that larvae throughout the field.
And then Raina's asking, how often do you get soil tests done?
That's a great question. So you got to remember, I'm an old guy already. So when I started out, I was hanging out at the ag agent's, Tony Valdez's office, and I learned at a program at one time that the county ag agents had a state program where they were doing free soil testing. So I'd get my soil tested every year, and sometimes I even got a couple of small grants from the Western SARE that let me do cover crop tests or cover crop demonstration projects. And that went on really nice for several years. I got to work with other neighbors and other farmers, and we did testing of different cover crops, the conditions, the watering amounts, and it was really nice to learn with other farmers what it really is to experience cover crops, how well they work, and how much effort it takes. And to be honest, one of the grants I got funded for, I had to write that I couldn't manage the cover crops because I had to make a decision. Is that either I wanted to water the vegetables that I was going to sell at the market, or water the cover crops. It was that dry that year, and I chose to water the vegetables, so all my cover crops dried up and died. But those are some of the choices you have to make. So I guess I got lost. I got off track a little bit. I apologize for going off track on that one.
No problem at all. Next question is from Isabel, and she asks, what are traditional cover crops that your parents or grandparents have used on that land?
So I think that that is a great question. So I wonder about that too, and I look at a lot of the weeds that are growing here naturally, and I think a lot of the weeds, or what we consider weeds, are beneficial to the soil. So like here in northern New Mexico, there's that what people call is that desert clover. I don't know the scientific name for it, but that's a weed, and people try to eradicate that. So it's so that's one example of I don't know if it's a native crop or a native cover crop, but it's been here since I can remember, and it's been told forever. And then another example might be it's something that you're looking at right now is the acequias, and the way they spread these different kinds of grasses and clovers across the whole region. So I think that was another way that they would manage a lot of soil nutrients. I know my grandparents and my great grandparents incorporated a lot of manures in different ways. I remember Grandpa Bustos would take a fresh bag of manure and put it at the head gate of the water, and then it would be kind of like a compost tea or a manure tea that would float down through the fields, and we'd see a lot of great growth after he would add the tea.
Don, are you still there? You might be frozen. I'm not sure. Maybe we just had a very abrupt ending to a wonderful presentation.